Okay, it's time to start. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning or good evening, depending where you are in the world. My name is Nikola Bešinović, and I'm from Technical University of Dresden. So I would like to welcome you to another great webinar that we are organizing in front of Informs RAS. And we'd like to welcome Paola Pellegrini from Gustave Eiffel today. And before we kick off, I would like to share some exciting events that we are organizing. So apart from Inform's annual meeting and the great sessions and competitions that we are organizing every year, we also have initiated a new conference. So it is Railway Planning Conference, and it will be in May 8th and 9th of May at BNSF headquarters, so in 4th North. There we will gather people from industry and academia, and we'll share the link in the chat afterwards with more information. So have a look. We'll have quite some interesting speakers, both from industry and academia, talking about some exciting topics about railway planning and traffic management. What we have today is a great chance to hear from Paola Pellegrini, who is now director of the lab at Gustave Eiffel. Maybe you got confused a bit. It used to be ESTAS, so it's changing the name of the institution, but I believe the office remains the same. So Paola has been working a lot on traffic management systems, developing algorithms and models for conventional railways, more recently for self-organized systems throughout many European projects, and now we'll have a chance to hear about all these exciting developments. So I think it's time to give the floor to Paola, and I would invite you to save your questions for chat. So feel free to write them down during the presentation in chat, and we will address them after Paola's presentation. So enjoy, and Paola, you can share your screen and take over from here.
Thank you, Nicola. In principle, it works.
Perfect.
That's it. Good. Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I am very honored to be here speaking. Just a minor correction. I'm research director, that is kind of professor, but not director of the lab. That is someone else. Thanks to him. So I'm gonna talk today about RECIFE. And if you spoke to me already, you've probably heard this word already a million times, but now you will have a clearer view, I hope, of what it is in summary. So the context of this, and that corresponds to most of my research, is the fact that today there is not much optimization that is deployed in the practice in traffic management. However, there is more and more willingness to move toward including optimization in these processes, and in particular by infrastructure managers. So we really hope this deployment status will evolve soon. And as most of you, I participated in the academic research to try to be ready to support this possible deployment sometime soon. And I did this in Lille, in the north of France, in the CEST laboratory, and in the traffic management team of this laboratory. As Nicola said, we were before IFSTAR, now we are Gustave Eiffel, and even before that, depending on your age, you may even have heard of INRETS. That was our name before that. We keep changing, so you stay tuned. But now we are Gustave Eiffel, and hopefully we will remain such for a little while. And so in Lille, one of the things we do, and the team I belong to actually does, is working on the RECIFE platform. And it has started about 20 years ago. I was not here yet, but it was already ongoing, as I will tell soon. So RECIFE is a platform that deals with railway traffic management, broadly speaking. But today we will mostly focus on real-time traffic management. So real-time traffic management is the problem aimed at minimizing the impact of perturbations. We can measure this impact in many ways, but whatever we want to, in general, I would say that if we want a general description of the real-time traffic management, this is what we want to do. And real-time traffic management comes at the end of a long traffic management and planning process that starts when we build infrastructures and keep being renewed periodically, defining new lines, defining timetables, with rolling stock rostering, crew scheduling, etc., and it ends up with real-time traffic management. And this problem is particularly difficult to be solved because railway have some characteristics that make the thing interesting. So, for example, in Europe, but not only, we have all these, we have a whole bunch of issues that make the thing challenging. For example, we have timetables that can be extremely dense. So in some critical part of the network, trains pass really, really close to each other. And so we may have a dramatic impact of small perturbations. In some parts of the network, we have mixed traffic. So we have freight trains that need to go with conventional passenger trains or even high-speed trains in some areas. And they have different capabilities. And so this may actually make a difference and increase the impact of perturbations again. And then we give a big importance to railway. So railway needs to work because it has a high economic and societal responsibility. We want to have sustainable mobility and accessibility of whole countries. And this is maybe not immediately economically advantageous, but we want it to work because it's important. So we are strongly motivated to solve this very complex problem. And doesn't work. Yeah, so we need to decide, sorry, my laptop is not super reactive. So we need to decide what traffic management measures we want to apply to minimize the impact of perturbations. And what this means can be very different, and how to do it can be very different depending on many aspects, as for example, the decisions we consider possible. So do we want to change the routing of the train? Do we want to change the stopping pattern, or just the schedule or the speeds? We can possibly change many things. And so the definition of our problem may also change with that. The definition of our problem will also change depending on what system we are considering. Are we considering the current system with drivers on board, for example, and fixed block installed? Or are we moving to a planned system, to a futuristic system in which trains can self-organize and come up with a successfully performing traffic? So depending on what we want to do, we need to define a problem and try to solve it. Another thing that has an impact, in my opinion, on what we need to do and what we can do is what is the perimeter we want to consider. So, as I said before, we may have mixed traffic networks, or we may have dedicated network to some specific type of traffic. We may want to deal with big stations or with big networks in which we have plenty of stations, but they are very small, and maybe it's a single track lines, or we may want to work with the urban network. So depending on what we want to do, we need to define the problem differently. There might be some constraints that are different, some objectives that are different, and probably the techniques also that are different. Why I'm saying all this is because I'm super proud of what we are doing, and I will tell you that we did wonderful things. But I totally realize, and I want to stress it from the beginning, that the specific problem the different research groups tackle implies that we may be many to be very good at doing different things that come under the same name. So I am aware of that, even if I'm going to claim we are super good. So the another thing that I think deserves being said is that traffic management, real-time traffic management, comes at the end of a whole long process, as I meant. But if depending on what we want to, on how we want to set this problem in the process, we may have different definitions for the problem itself. So do we want to consider all, for example, constraints that were considered in the previous phases when we define what can or cannot be done in real time? Or do we want to measure the flexibility, well, to control the flexibility with respect to what was done before? So I think if we consider real-time traffic management on its own, we can do different things with respect to the case in which we want to consider it at the end of the whole process. So traffic management is super various, and depending on the precise definition, we can have different problems. And what we try to do is to address plenty of problems with these RECIFE platforms. That is a tool that we have put together in the last 20 years, as I mentioned, so including various algorithms and tools and interfaces to interface these optimization algorithms with traffic simulators. And we have a bunch of case studies on which we test everything that you see here. So some main peculiarities of this RECIFE are, I think I listed 4. And the first one, and I would say one of the 4 most important ones is that we put together optimization and simulation. So this is not super frequent in the literature, I think, but we are very happy to keep doing it. So when I say optimization, when I focus only on optimization, I consider that I focus only on decision making, and I need to do some simplification hypotheses to be able to model the real problem. And I try to improve as much as possible my decisions considering these simplification hypotheses. And I compare the results I get, for example, on the basis of the objective function or the computation time, etc. Another branch of research focuses on simulation, in which usually there is the application of predefined rules, and there are much fewer simplifications of the space. But here we don't have to make decisions. So if the system is more complex, is less of a problem, let's say. So the reason why we put these 2 things together is that we think that this strengthens our analysis and conclusions very much, because it makes them much less dependent on our modeling hypothesis. And this is, I think, very, very important. However, this comes with a couple of challenges, of course. The first one is that one must master concurrently optimization techniques because one still wants to have nice algorithms. But also he must master simulation tools and interfaces between the two. And so this takes a lot of time and effort, and a lot of time and effort also to solve all the technical issues that come with the integration of software tools that were born to be separated, and then they don't necessarily allow easy communication. So this takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, but in RECIFE, this is one of our strengths, I would say, that we often test the result of our optimization algorithms in simulation. Another peculiarity that makes us somehow original, I would say, is that we consider a microscopic infrastructure model. So we start from a railway network, can be a station or can be much bigger, and we go into the detail of block sections, track detection sections, block sections. We know everything about the train, the infrastructure, to then be able to draw exactly the blocking time stairways of the trains, knowing all the details on the train movement. For example, when the head of the train has exited a track circuit, a track detection section, but the tail of the train is still there, then the train is still blocking both, etc. So we are convinced that it is important to consider the microscopic infrastructure model and all the details on train movements. And we think that it's also important, at least when there are stations, big stations involved, to implement the route lock sectional release interlocking system. So in general, our models do so. The strength of this is that we can then fully exploit the actual infrastructure capacity, but it comes at the cost, of course, of having big data sets to represent infrastructures and movements. And so we need to have some to be able to deal with big instances and big data sets. Same reasoning is linked to rerouting, local rerouting. So we are a bit fixed on local rerouting. Local rerouting is super important. And it comes to the limit that we may have situations in which local rerouting is very, very big. So there are many possibilities for routing trains. For example, you see here a portion of 30 kilometers in between Paris and Le Havre in France. And here a train can have up to around 300 routes to go from one side to the other, which is big. And in the bottom, you see Lille-Flandre station, again in France. And here, in some, depending from origin and destinations, but one train can have up to about 450 rerouting possibilities. And I agree with you and know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is crazy. We will never use 450 alternative routes. Anyway, dispatchers don't use 450 alternative routes. And I agree, but there are two remarks on this. The first is that dispatchers don't use 450 alternative routes, but at least one reason can be that it is impossible for a human to deal with such a big problem. So we cannot limit ourselves just because dispatchers don't do it. And the second thing is that I don't know if you ever talk with dispatchers, and I didn't have the chance to do it so as often as I would have liked, but anytime I have been exchanging ideas with some dispatchers, it comes out that there are routes that are never taken for a train. It's impossible for the train to go there. But then in some cases it does. And defining in what cases this can happen it's impossible. At least this is my personal experience, and I will be happy if you have some tracks of different conclusions, but identifying routes that will never be useful, for me, for the moment, it has been impossible. And so to make sure we keep exploiting the whole infrastructure capacity, what we do is getting ready to deal with big sets of alternative routes. So for example, in Lille and in Rouen, that is the first part of the line, we deal with big numbers and we find a way to deal with those big numbers of alternative routes. And we find a way because it's difficult. That's the challenge that comes with it. And the second challenge is that we move away from a pure scheduling problem and we introduce routing. So there is quite some interesting things to be done as for optimization. One other thing that we do is trying to work on different problems and to work on them consistently. So for the moment, most of our research has been focused on real-time traffic management, but we've been also working on other problems, and I think it's very important. So we try to propose ways to optimize various steps of the process of the road traffic management process consistently, based on consistent hypotheses and consistent models. And when it's possible, we also consider problems jointly. For example, line planning and timetabling are very close. Sometimes they can be considered jointly, for example. So this has the strength, we think, of making decision coherent. So if we are very lucky and we start deploying, well, the world starts deploying optimization, we need to be ready to supply something that makes sense altogether on one side. On the other side, we can maybe generalize in lessons learned that we get from one stage to another stage, at least to some extent. Not everything we learn in real-time traffic management has a direct impact on timetabling, but something, or even on infrastructure design. And so why not exploiting this? And then we, of course, well, if we do optimization and we manage to solve the junction of two problems, then of course it's better than solving the two problems sequentially. If we manage to solve the overall problem, of course, that is not a given. So again, another thing that is important and that we focus on in RECIFE, but comes with a challenge that is, well, the problems become more and more complex if you put them all together, of course, but also, and interesting in a different way to me, it is not immediate to understand what are the lessons learned that can be generalized from one stage to the other, from one problem to the other. And this is an uncommon, let's say, research question, in my opinion. And so as such, it is interesting to try to work on it. So this is very shortly the philosophy at the basis of RECIFE, this platform that starts being big, at least for in my opinion. And we've been using this platform, and so promoting this philosophy on a number of applications that stimulate more and more in all the directions, of course. And many of them I consider success stories. And so I'm going to tell you about a couple that are just examples, but we can talk about others later if you like, or well, later in the in the years. So the first one is RECIFE-MILP. RECIFE-MILP is a mixed integer linear programming based algorithm for train routing and scheduling after perturbations. And RECIFE-MILP has been the basis of my research, I would say, in the last 10 years. We've integrated it with simulators, with different simulators. We've done it in open loop and closed loop. So just on one shot, optimize and then let's simulate and see what happens, or let's keep optimizing periodically and simulating, representing an actual deployment in which optimization is constantly reassessed based on the latest information on traffic. That's closed loop. So we did that with RECIFE-MILP. And we also had the chance of benchmarking RECIFE-MILP with another algorithm from the literature. It's super rare. But the only time we managed to do that, RECIFE-MILP got the best result. And so it's a good algorithm. I'm very proud of it. And a variant of it is currently being used for the sorted mobility project, in which intelligent trains need to self-organize, so need to make hypotheses on what traffic management solutions can be. And so we are adopting RECIFE-MILP to make train-centered decisions. Yeah, so RECIFE-MILP is my baby, and if you've talked to me, you've heard of it already. So I was suggested to just talk of something different for once, and I agree. So I thought I will just speak for a minute of RECIFE-CP, which is another algorithm for train routing and scheduling in case of perturbation, based on the same modeling hypothesis as RECIFE-MILP. And as being in the RECIFE platform, this is quite straightforward. So RECIFE-CP is based on constraint programming, and it was the first algorithm developed in this RECIFE family. It was not the RECIFE platform back then. It was in the early 2000s, but the ideas were all there because it was tested. It was tested, putting together optimization and simulation. It was solving a microscopic model, considering, giving a lot of importance to train rerouting. And then variants of this constraint programming model were proposed for real-time traffic management, timetabling, saturation problems. So again, going around in this traffic management process to exploit knowledge here and there. So this RECIFE-CP is the first RECIFE algorithm that was then improved. Well, we proposed a variant, including a new tool that is available in constraint programming that is called time interval variables. So I'm not going to go in the details of models today, but we can go any other time. So we recently proposed RECIFE-CPI, and one thing that we tried to do was we're comparing it with RECIFE-MILP and proposing a hybrid version of the two, because what we observed is that MILP is extremely good with scheduling, but when there are many alternative routes and the instance becomes very big, then it becomes a bit weak. In particular, what we do in these algorithms, RECIFE-CPI and RECIFE-MILP, is solving the pure scheduling problem, in which we use the routes that are defined in the timetable. And then we use this as a starting point for the search of the optimal or a good solution in the space with all the rerouting alternatives available. So I'm going to show you some results we got for this hybrid version. And okay, let me tell you what you're seeing here. So these are experiments we ran on the Lille station. You saw it in the picture before. It's a complex terminal station. We allow 3-minute computation to to both RECIFE CPI, RECIFE MILP, and the hybrid version. And we tested several instances with several numbers of trains. So we increased progressively the time horizon we consider to have small instances up to very big instances. So we start with 10 trains on the bottom, and then we increase up to 130, which cover about 3.5 hours of traffic in Lille Flandre. Then we consider as a reference the solution obtained by RECIFE MILP with the fixed routes. So we do not change with respect to the timetable, but we do optimize scheduling. And so the zero gain is, the zero gain is this solution. And then with respect to this, we compute the percentage gain in total delay. So for example, something that is at a X value 10, it does 10% better than RECIFE MILP with fixed routes. So you can see here in green RECIFE CPI, in red RECIFE MILP, and in blue it's the hybrid. The square is the fixed route solution. The circle is the rerouting, the solution with scheduling and routing. So the more on the right, we observe something, the better. So the higher the improvement. Something that is very much on the left does worse than RECIFE MILP with fixed routes. Moreover, you can see a line between squares and circles, and this line shows the path between the fixed route solution and the variable route solution. So what is the contribution of rerouting? What does the algorithm manage to do thanks to rerouting once it starts from the fixed route solution, it's considering? So you can see that when we have small instances, 10 or 20 trains, whatever algorithm we consider, it doesn't matter. So they all get to the same fixed route solution, and they all manage to improve in the same way thanks to rerouting. But then something starts changing when we increase the size of the instances. So if we focus on the red lines first, RECIFE MILP manages to do less and less thanks to rerouting. So it's quite, well, it has a solution with fixed routes, but then it doesn't improve over it. If you see, starting with 80 trains, there is no more line. It does not improve over the first solution because the instances become too big. If we look at the green constraint programming, when there are more and more trains, this only scheduling problem, so no rerouting, the scheduling problem becomes more and more complex. And it doesn't manage to do as well as mixed integer linear programming. So the square is on the left. However, the line showing what it can do thanks to rerouting is still quite long, even with very big numbers of trains, and so big instances. So we put the two together and we get to the blue. So in the blue, we have MILP that solves the fixed route problem, and then CPI that takes this solution and improves it, adding rerouting. And as you can see, well, the fixed route solution is, of course, the same as the reference. And then the line keeps being longer for much bigger instances than RECIFE MILP. So we concluded here that it might be interesting indeed to hybridize, and we should go deeper into hybridization. We did another work, totally different, but I chose these because I want to show the panel of things we can do and we do with RECIFE. So we assessed in simulation, considering trains and passengers, what happens when we apply different traffic management rules in a part of the Paris suburban network where there is extreme dense traffic. So it's RER, B, and D. And so we ran a real big set of simulations to assess the impact of different rules. I'm not going to go into the details because I don't have time, but we, of course, can talk about this later. So in conclusion, RECIFE is a, I think, powerful platform that allows us doing plenty of interesting things. That does optimization and simulation. It focuses on microscopic model with local rerouting, and that tries to go into problem consistency. So as in any scientific work, the more you do, the more ideas you have to do better. And so some perspectives here. So we need to keep improving the quality of our algorithms. So trivial. We need to keep an eye on the state of the art on optimization, generic optimization to improve. We may keep using cross-fertilization from other modes of transport, for example. And we may have to take into account improved computing power. So something that was impossible yesterday maybe will become possible tomorrow. So that's trivial. Let's keep improving algorithms. But one thing we want to do at some point is go deeper into the analysis of the hypothesis we make. So how close are we to reality when we optimize? Is something that appears good to the algorithm actually good in reality? Does the algorithm makes the good choice, although the data that it takes in input is not really precise and cannot be really precise? Are we picking all the critical aspects, or are we missing something? So we need to answer these questions and then to address some of the points that we are missing once we understand in which order. Another thing we want to do is to test with several simulators. We now work very much with OpenTrack, and we've started working with most of the other simulators you see here. When you have the slides later, there are links on these names in case you don't know some of them. And so the reason why I think we really need to use further simulators is that it gives us access to different collaborations, and this will definitely improve our expertise. But also, any simulator has some assumptions necessarily. And so by using different ones, we may be able to get rid, in some sense, not to be biased by the modeling assumptions of specific simulators. But of course, there are several technical issues and also, procedures that need to put in place to interface our optimization algorithms with various simulators. One other thing, again, a bit trivial, but we need to increase the number of the case studies we have available to test, because we need to understand what works when. And to do so, we need to have several different, but also several similar cases on which we can test. For this, we need to struggle with data collection, modeling, and validation. If you tried already, you know it's a pain. If you didn't try, you're lucky. You will probably eventually, and it is a huge work. So we need to focus on this work at some point, I hope. And also, though, we need to find a way to analyze the results, to choose which case studies we should tackle to understand what works when, depending on the type of question we want to answer. And this is not trivial, so it's fun. We also want to keep studying various problems, as I mentioned. So this has it implies the challenge of understanding different problems and defining good algorithms for each. It requires to understand the links between problems. That is not necessarily trivial. And it requires to devise, to put in place feedback loops to exploit knowledge from all stages. So going forward, if I understand something in timetabling, then I use it in real-time traffic management. But it's important, we think, to set also the feedback loop. If we understand something in real-time traffic management, can we use it when we design infrastructures? How can we use it when we define infrastructures? Don't know, but hopefully will one day. And another one that I really want to do eventually is to study how the design of traffic management processes impacts what are the needs for optimization. So is the human in the loop? What are the computational time that are available for optimizing? What is the trigger for optimization? Who are the stakeholders that need to cooperate in optimization? There are very many possibilities, and very many possibilities that are today envisaged for actual deployment. And to be honest, I'm not sure, well, I haven't put enough effort in understanding what are the requirements and options associated with the different possibilities. But I think we need to understand these requirements and options to try to see how to fit optimization into them with the different possibilities that are considered. So that's all for me. Please contact me if you have questions and you feel shy to discuss today. And also, in case you want to be part of RECIFE, or you know someone brilliant, young or not so young, master or PhD students who would like to be part of this, there might be something to do there. And thanks to all the people who contributed directly to RECIFE. I just mentioned some, I forgot plenty. I focused on the last 10 years, that is when I joined the group. But so, yeah, feel free to ask questions. And there are some references that I will not focus on now. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Paola, for this very expressive and very detailed presentation, and yet keeping it on a high level and managing to make it in this time. So that was great, and I believe there are plenty of questions. So maybe we could start with a very detailed ones coming from Thomas Graffanino. So somewhere in the beginning on slide 7, you mentioned a certain number of routes. Could you maybe elaborate a bit how the routes are created, or how do you count them?
Yes, so
some could count more than 450, for example.
So 450, so depending on the case, if we obtain a list of possible routes, we use that list of possible routes. Otherwise, the 450 are all the feasible combinations given the interlocking system. So what is actually possible in reality? There are some sequences of block sections that cannot be operated, of course, but everything that is actually feasible is in there.
Okay, clear. Good. And then going to the computation time, one part of the question is, would you consider fixed computation time to 3 minutes on slide 11, I believe? And while the solver is running, what happens with the traffic? How would you consider that evolution?
Yeah.
Would you, and how? Yes.
Sorry. So 3 minutes. I forgot the first question. I will go to the second.
So is it a fixed time
Yeah.
to 3 minutes?
So it's the maximum time. If the optimal solution is proven to be optimal before that, the algorithm stops. Otherwise, it stops after 3 minutes. It's a parameter. We tested 2, 3, but it doesn't really change the meaning of the results. But yes, it's fixed. So the second question, indeed, this type of algorithm is okay, I think, if we think of a periodic optimization in which we keep constantly an eye on what's happening in traffic. At a given time, we make a short-term prediction of where traffic will be in 5 minutes, for example. And we make optimization considering this prediction as the initial state. So we know where trains will be in 5 minutes if they keep following the current plan. We take 3 minutes to compute a new plan, possibly, and 2 minutes to implement it, for example. So starting in 5 minutes, in which we hope traffic followed more or less the prediction we made, then we apply the new plan. This is what we call closed loop optimization.
Okay, good. And staying on closed loop optimization, how would you ensure that your optimization solution does not significantly vary between two or more consecutive runs? Would you need some additional constraints or to balance it out or not? Could you elaborate a bit on it?
Yeah, so today we don't. I mean, today we may have some constraints that forbid changing some decisions. For example, we have it for trains that need to stop at stations. We cannot change the platform every 10 minutes because passengers will get a bit bothered. So after a certain time, we cannot change the platform anymore. But after that, apart from that, we allow the algorithm to change everything. What I think we should do is to set soft constraints so some penalization if we keep changing decisions. But what I haven't been able to do yet is finding pertinent weights to decide, okay, I'm okay with losing something in terms of delay, but I want to keep my decision. How much delay I'm okay with losing to keep my decisions? This trade-off, I don't know how to set it.
Okay, so I see one more open question.
Yes, totally.
Good. And another interesting one coming from Ingo Hansen is you talk about microscopic detailed level of modeling in RECIFE. So how far can we go with solving larger networks? And would you always keep it at the microscopic level, or do you consider some different aggregations and the different models that communicate, or anything in between?
So depends on so how far can we go to have microscopic models? It depends on how many routes you want to consider for the trains, in my experience. If you're okay with scheduling only, we optimized already the whole East Coast Main Line that you see on this slide on the left, which is super big. Well, this point down here is London King's Cross. So imagine how big is all this, but without rerouting. If you want to consider full rerouting possibilities, then of course you stay much bigger, much smaller. Already, if you have a complex station as Lille-Planck, you cannot go much further than that. So what we are trying to do now is to, well, we are working on an algorithm to coordinate different application of local optimization local microscopic optimization. If we want to make big network level decisions, let's say, how can we put the small parts all together? This, we are working on it.
Okay, good. And we got a question from Fernando Gomide. Hope pronounce it good enough. You mentioned that you combine optimization with simulation. So could you maybe elaborate a bit on the interaction of the two?
Yeah, indeed. We don't use simulation for optimizing, which I understand now might have been a bit confusing. But we use simulation to assess our algorithms. So we make decisions, for example, with typically passing orders and routing of trains. We impose these decisions in simulation and we simulate. So we have good representation of driving profiles, for example, of the behavior of drivers, depending on the simulator, etc. That represents, in a sense, what would happen in reality if we applied the routing and passing orders that we decided before. And so for doing this, we need to have a simulator that accepts taking orders. So, for example, in the list I'm showing later, in a later slide, there's no RAS. Maybe, well, if you haven't seen the list, you would have understood it later. It's because RAS doesn't take orders. And I make decisions in optimization. I want to impose those decisions in simulator.
Okay, clear. And on type of disruptions and disturbances. So could you say what do you typically consider? And as a follow-up, what about different train speeds? So different speed profiles, is that something that you would consider, or directly in the model, or pre-compute, and how would you deal with it?
Yeah, so indeed, type of perturbations, mostly when we do real-time traffic management, we only deal with perturbations that do not require the intervention of stakeholders other than the infrastructure manager. So it's typically delay of trains, speed limit, temporary speed limitations, maybe one track is blocked, but there is an alternative track that can be used, or long dwell times at stations, for example, etc. So minor perturbations that are dealt with by the infrastructure manager alone in the practice. And I don't know what was the other question. Sorry.
Yeah, about variable train speeds.
Yes, so we are just working now in collaboration with TU Delft on adding decisions on train speeds during optimization to do moving blocks, actually. But other than that, what we do for the moment is to make decisions considering only one speed profile, and then we optimize afterwards with an uncollinear optimization algorithm in particular to find the good speed profile respecting the routes and orders that we decided before, to minimize energy consumption and delay, but we do it a posteriori, so not at the same time.
Okay, good. And looking at the practice, what kind of algorithms do you see are the most promising? Because at some point you talked about constraint programming, there was CPI, and now MILP. Shall we stay with MILP? Shall we still consider CP? And yes, any thoughts on it?
Well, I think I like milk because at some point it may prove optimality and then stop. While CPI never, it's not meant to prove optimality. So I like milk, but I must admit that if we can do better with CPI, we should maybe move. But I don't have a position there. Looking at the practice, I think we need to develop two types of algorithms. One is algorithms achieving good performance considering complex situations, be it milk, CP, or whatever. And another type of algorithm on which I haven't been working for the moment, but something that gives an immediate answer for a trivial problem, for an easy problem. So there is a conflict that was not predicted, and now we need a solution for what happens. So then we don't care of looking around the trains that will come in the next hour and all the routing possibilities, but we need a solution now for this specific conflict that is going to happen here. And we have 1 second to make that solution. And for that, we won't, so I don't think milk is a good option. We should use something different. But it's two different problems for two different moments of the deployment, I think.
Okay, and looking at some usual suspects where these algorithms could be actually implemented and run, like railway companies, metro operators, what kind of help are you interested in getting from them, and how do you see the interaction with these companies? Them helping you in the research, and I think it's clear how we help industry with the algorithms.
Well, I would, dreaming, there's someone who comes here and answers my questions. So we need, I think what we are missing is a real exchange between academia and industry that takes a bit of time. Usually when we do projects together, it's in a hurry, and so we don't manage to go deep enough. But if we could pick a case study, for example, run some studies, really define the problem and see where I'm lacking something. As I mentioned, I'm making many hypotheses, but I'm considering many aspects, but are they all the important ones? And then maybe we can, what would be awesome would be to do some analysis, then rediscuss everything like flat. Let's go flat, let's rediscuss. Based on the results, what do we need to change? What do we need to investigate? So this is, I need expertise from the practice. And data, clean data.
Good, and so we mentioned the CP, milk, and what about any other approaches? Anything from the domain of artificial intelligence, maybe?
Well, we are using some meta heuristics mostly for sub-problems. In particular, we select sub-routes, subset of routes that are interesting for specific scenarios. And as I mentioned, we pick speed profiles with meta heuristics. And those are usually, well, mostly ant colony optimization algorithms. We haven't applied them to scheduling problems yet, because I think, well, MILP is quite impressive for that. So maybe we should move, we may move to a math heuristic, but meta heuristic for scheduling, I don't directly see the need for the moment.
Okay, and maybe to end with a difficult one, what about usability of the solutions in practice? So in research, we talk about optimal solutions, but in practice, do dispatchers understand them? Can they actually implement them? And is that bridge still big? How do you see it?
That's another, I don't know. So we had the occasion to show our results to some dispatchers, apply our decisions based on some really happened scenarios. And when we proposed our solutions, they were all happy because, hey, they had thought of that, but they didn't dare, but they had thought of that. So I think we are not that far from proposing something that is realistic. But then, of course, sometimes we will propose things that are non-realistic, and we need to be told why they are not, so we can improve. But this iteration with the practice is not there yet for us, at least. But we are happy if you want to interact. Please let me know.
Great. So looking at the time, I would like really to thank everyone for this great and colorful discussion. Thank you, Paola, for the great presentation. I see there are some questions that we haven't addressed here. So I would encourage you to reach out to Paola. She would be super happy to hear from you. I believe you can also meet her in person at Rail Belgrade next month. Yes, so with this, we end the formal part of this webinar. We'll share the video online afterwards. You'll get the link. So thank you again. And I would like to ask Paola if you would have some time to stay around a bit. Maybe someone wants to say hi, but we will stop recording now.